had the pleasure of meeting Amanda Osuna at an Austin Digital Jobs ADJ Mixer, I think back in February or March. Lovely, lovely gal. She is the senior recruiting manager, at Accruent. So don't all bombard her after she speaks. And she's over both domestic and international roles, her team. And she is also really cool, created an interviewer certification program focused on behavioral-based interviewing, which is what she is here to talk to you guys about today. And she is here to distinguish the differences between traditional interviewing and behavioral interviewing, which is fast becoming the new normal. Ladies and gentlemen, I introduce Amanda Osuna. Thank you, Amanda.
All right, good morning. How's everyone doing today?
Good morning.
Good. Well, I'd like to thank David from Toastmasters, wherever he is, for making me extremely self-conscious now. So every time I say or I will be looking at you. So thanks for that. Well, again, I am here to talk to you a little bit about the difference between traditional and behavioral interviewing. As Shannon mentioned, this really is the new norm for interview processes. So want to really make sure you're well versed between the difference and what to expect when you go into a behavioral interview, because it is a little more difficult than your typical traditional interview. So just getting started, introducing myself, as Shannon mentioned, I am the recruiting manager at Accruent, have been in this particular position since February of this year. Started off with going to college at St. Mary's University, thought that I wanted to go into law school, which like most people who go to college, they realize they have no idea what they want to do, and quickly changed my track, realized that HR was actually where my interest lay in that point, realized that I just did not want to go to law school and wanted to get into recruiting. So started my career in staffing with Key Staff. They're a local staffing agency based out of Austin. They have 5 different locations around Texas, and so started my way as a front desk coordinator, moved up to recruiter, account manager, and then started our corporate team, so got a lot of experience there. Just realized that something was still missing, kind of wanted that piece of being able to see when I put someone in a job how they're actually doing and being able to work with them. So in staffing, you place people, but you don't really get to see how they do in the long run, especially if they're direct hire. Some of you are familiar with staffing, how that works, you understand. But really thought that corporate was where my interest started lie. So went to Accruent in 2015. I've done corporate recruiting for every single role pretty much at Accruent, starting with engineering, working in product management, marketing, G&A, finance, people teams, etc. So just to put a plug in about our company right now, we are literally hiring for almost everything in every department at our company, including in Minneapolis and then in international roles, if you know anyone there. So some of those positions consist of engineering. We have software associate, software engineer, QA engineer. We have a director of engineering, director of product management, financial analyst, business analyst. So I really mean it. We're hiring for everything. So come find me after this if you have any questions. Also throw my information up on the screen so you can connect with me through LinkedIn if you are looking for a job. And then these are just some pictures of our team. As Shannon mentioned, there is the Job Seekers Network. They hosted one of their largest career fairs of the year at our new office here in, I believe that was March timeframe. So that's a picture of our recruiting team, and that's just a picture from our company picnic. So as you can see, a pretty tight-knit group. If you talk to anyone from Accruent and recruiting, they're phenomenal, and it'll be one of those people on that picture. Alrighty, so as Shannon mentioned, Accruent is very focused on making sure that our teams have the best interview processes in place. So just show of hands, how many of you have been through a negative interview experience? Okay, majority of the room, right? So what we want to make sure as a company is that we are finding the best candidates possible. But that's only going to be possible if we have the best programs and the best interviewers, right? So one of the things Google does really well is they prep their teams to make sure that they have all of the information they need going into an interview. They actually select certain interviewers to be on interview teams just to make sure that they're up to speed. So what we realized is on the recruiting front, we had a really great process in place, but we weren't always relaying that information properly to the interview teams. Or let's say if someone was fresh out of college or had just, maybe had a year of work experience, they did not necessarily have a lot of interview experience. So there's nothing worse than going into a job and realizing your interviewer is not prepared, or they don't know you, they haven't looked at your LinkedIn, they haven't looked at your resume, or frankly, they just don't care. They seem like they're unfocused. Anyone have that experience too? Yeah, it's awful, right? So then that gives you a very bad perception of the company, the interviewer, and you already don't want to work there, even if doesn't matter how they felt about you. Now you're turned off from the company. So we wanted to make sure that we were preventing that on our end, which is why we started the interviewer certification program. So this is a picture of one of our certified interviewers. And then as a company, we have roughly about 800 people in total. In Austin, we have about 350. And right now we have 109 people certified in the interviewer certification program, which is awesome. We're looking to get everyone certified by the end of the year. So that's just a little bit about that program. Alrighty, so does anyone know what traditional interviews are? Someone raise their hand over here. Oh, yes?
It's tell me about yourself, tell me about your background as it relates to this position, why do you think you'd be good for this position, that kind of stuff.
Right, so she said it's the tell me about yourself type question. So what's your name?
I'm Jennifer.
Jennifer, okay, can you tell me if you can describe what kind of style that would be?
You mean, what method, or we're in front of each other, or do you mean, I don't know.
Right, more like method for those types of questions.
Well, I mean, generally those happen over the phone, I find, but then they ask those kinds of questions to see if you're in the ballpark,
Right.
Right, with your experience.
So more like a preliminary phone screen to go over background information, things like that. Okay, definitely true too. Have y'all ever had those questions asked in your regular interview as well? Yeah, okay. So the traditional interviews are just exactly like what Jennifer described. They are very much a hypothetical type of question. So I'm going to show you an example of what that would look like. Brought to you by Michael Scott. Well, anyway, that's Michael Scott from The Office. So basically, he goes over a traditional interview question. So my least favorite question of all time is, what is your greatest strength, or what's your biggest weakness? Has anyone been asked that question before? Everybody has. That is the worst interview question. So that's actually what Michael just gets asked. And he said, let me tell you what my greatest weakness is. And he goes into his greatest strength. And he says, they're the same. My greatest strength is my greatest weakness, which is actually, I think, probably 5 years ago, what people were told to respond with. So they were told, if you get asked what's your greatest weakness, try and play it up into a strength, which is the worst thing you can do. So don't do that. Don't be Michael Scott. Okay, so moving on to traditional interviews. So these are going to be very hypothetical questions. So just like Jennifer mentioned, tell me about yourself. What would you do in this particular situation? It is not really discovering anything in particular about your style, and it's very easy to prep for these. So just show of hands again, how many people have been asked hypothetical questions in an interview? Okay, so everybody. This is very much the normal interview style, I'd say probably about 5 years ago. Now we're moving into more behavioral-based questions, but again, hypothetical is still popular. And you'll see that recruiters on your typical phone screen, when they're interviewing you at the beginning, will ask you more hypothetical-based questions because, as Jennifer mentioned, they're really just trying to get to know you and the role. So traditional is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just that we are trying to find out more about you throughout the whole process. So just keep that in mind, okay? And then these are more gut feeling versus fact. So what we also try and prevent is someone choosing people based on any kind of biasness. So if you look like me, or if we have the same interest, and I really like you in the interview, but I ask you a lot of hypothetical questions, and I really don't know anything about you, but I still like you, then I'm probably going to choose you for an interview. We don't want that. We want people to choose people based off of specific facts and examples. So that's kind of what a traditional question does, is you're going over your gut versus your actual facts and information you're finding out about the candidate, okay? And then open-ended responses. So really you can be as open-ended with these questions as you like. It gives you more room to prep again for these questions. So just a lot more, again, preparation for this one, okay? And then here's some examples of some traditional interview questions. So what would you do if? What's your greatest strength? Again, my least favorite question. If you were in XYZ situation, how would you solve it? Why do you want to work for us? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? And what would your manager say about your work ethic? So a lot of these are very broad. If someone asked you what would your manager say about your work ethic, are you ever going to say anything negative? Probably not. Hopefully not. hopefully you're going to say something very positive, right? There's definitely different ways that we've taught our interview teams on how to ask these questions, but in a behavioral method, so they're finding out more about you and your experience. So overall, again, just a reminder, traditional questions are not necessarily a bad thing. They are necessary at times. As a recruiter, I always ask, tell me about your background, tell me about yourself, and then I'll dig deeper into the specifics of the role and their background. But behavioral are always going to be paired with traditional now. So that's a little bit about traditional. Anyone have questions about traditional? Yes.
Instead of telling us about all of these different variations on questions that we might bring, could you possibly tell us what is it that the interviewer is hoping to get from those questions?
From these specific questions?
Well, tell us as an example, why you want to work for us, what would your manager say about you, what's your greatest strength, what are they after, what are they looking for?
Right.
What is it that they want to get?
Right, so the question is, what are interviewers really trying to get out of these specific questions? So really, I mean, the goal, especially before behavioral questions were a method, the goal of traditional questions were to learn more about the candidate, right, in hopes that the candidate was having high integrity and humility and answering them correctly. So if you're saying, what is your greatest strength? Okay, you're going to tell me exactly what your greatest strength is, or weakness, or just background information. So the goal is hopefully to learn more about the candidate, right? But again, with traditional interviews, you're not necessarily going to get a lot of correct information because you can prep so well for these and know all these questions ahead of time that you can essentially say whatever, right? So does that answer your question?
Sort of. It's still not clear what they want. Or why are they wasting the time? Why does the interviewer waste time with something like this when it's not distinct of what they're going to get? What are they trying to get?
Right, yeah, I mean also lack of preparation, so lack of really going in depth and asking those questions, because let's say if I am a hiring manager and I just want to get this interview over with as fast as possible, then I can just ask you these questions and then be done instead of having to prep for it, looking at those behavioral questions. Also, again, just hopes that the candidate is being truthful.
Okay. Say, for example, if you were in a catch-by-disease situation, how would you resolve it? What does the person do from their institution?
Well, okay, let's say if they were saying, how would you resolve a situation if you got into a conflict with a coworker? So if you say that you would sit down and meet with them, you would talk it through and hopefully not have to bring it to your supervisor. That as the hiring manager, I would say, okay, well, if he has a problem on my team, then he's not going to bring it to me. He's going to resolve it on his own. And hopefully that is what you would actually do if you would come to the team, right? But on the other side of that, I don't know if that's actually how you're going to resolve the issue, because that's what you're telling me you're going to do, not what you have actually done, right?
But what are you hoping to hear?
It depends on the answer, right? It depends on the hiring manager, so it depends on what they're looking for. So if they say, tell me what you would do in the situation, if I'm a hiring manager that likes to be really hands-off and I want them to resolve it on their own, if that's the answer I'm looking for, then hopefully that's what he's going to give me, right? Or if he says, I'd bring it to you first if I want to be involved. I think it just depends on the manager in that situation.
Thank you. I was going to say thank you for answering that question, because I too come across that question often. Would you bring a conflict to a superior, or would you try to resolve it yourself? And it seems like a catch-22, because you don't want to bother people with personal issues or personality issues.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I would think the majority of managers will want to know if there's conflict.
Maybe.
I think probably what we're going to see with behavioral is that ultimately the hiring manager or whoever is trying to get roughly the same information, but with the behavioral style question, they're giving at examples so that they're actually going to hear the truth, more of the truth, not a hypothetical, this is what I think I would do, but actually this is what I've done in the past. I also think that probably what we'll see eliminated from Amanda, and Amanda and I used to work together, so this
Tag team with me.
we didn't plan this. But I think what we're also going to see is you're going to see some behavioral type questions that are just, they ask essentially, they're trying to get at the same type of information these are, but they ask them in a much better way. So if you do end up getting someone who doesn't really know how to interview, and they ask a question like this, you can actually answer it in a behavioral way. So I think that's probably, I'm sorry if I'm just made up something. But now
No, that's completely right.
so.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about that under the behavioral interview method, but again, with this is not necessarily going to give you a good interview experience for you or your interviewer. So we'll go over how to respond to traditional questions with a behavioral interview response. Any other questions on this? Yes.
So I'm just trying to put this in context. So we've done an initial interview, the technical experts.
This can be, yeah. So the question is, what level of interview is this? Is this initial interview, deep dive interview, et cetera? This can be any interview. So it depends on the company. A lot of recruiters do this as a first phone screen. Some of them do it during the follow-up interview, first round. Truly, it can be any interview. I've seen it done on every round. Yes.
So a few minutes ago, you said you usually start off saying, tell me about yourself, and I forget you said your other question was. How much detail and what direction, how should you focus that question?
You mean as a response?
Yeah.
Okay, so the question was that when someone starts off saying, tell me about your background, tell me about yourself, how much detail should you go in? I would say if it's like a recruiter phone screen, this is your very first initial round and the first time you're talking to someone from that company, I would say you're able to go a little bit deeper into the role specifically or into your background. I would say start off at a position that's most relevant. So if you have no experience that's relevant to this role from 20 years ago, probably don't need to mention it. I have some candidates that do, and it doesn't necessarily hurt them, but again, make sure you're using your time as wisely as possible. So going over anything that's in relation to that position that you're applying for, going into a little bit more depth, but making sure you're not completely overtaking that conversation because you want to make sure that the recruiter has time to ask you questions. When it's in a specific interview, I think you're going to need to shorten that time down by just a little bit since they're going to have a lot more questions to ask you. Does that answer your question?
Well, yeah, so basically keep it very job-based, don't really.
Right, right. So that's a good question too. So some people like to tell me their background about their personal life. HR laws does not let me say anything about that. I can't even write it down. So I don't want to know anything personal, as horrible as that might sound. Don't dive into anything on the personal level, just stick to professional. Yes.
What if it applies as far as your values and skills though?
In what regard?
If they ask the strengths question, are you saying you shouldn't bring anything personal into it, only professional experiences?
So the question is, if you can bring something personal, if they ask you like a values or a strengths question. I think that also depends on the question too, right? So one of the questions that's actually on your sheet is tell me about a personal accomplishment, and I think one's tell me about a personal goal, which is completely fine, right? Because one of the things we look for is we want to make sure people are a good values match for the whole company. So even if you're a great employee, what are you doing outside of work that makes you a great person too? So I think it's making sure that if you're going to talk about a personal goal, okay, well, one of my goals is to run a half marathon. So what are you doing to get to that point? But not diving so deeply into your personal life, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Yes.
I realize this may be somewhat a tangential question to your subject, but since you brought up personal question.
Yeah, go for it.
What do you do if you're asked a specifically illegal question? For example, if the interviewer asks you color, how do you handle it? Do you say, none of your business? I don't remember.
Yeah, just say that. Yeah. Okay, so the question is, what if an interviewer asks you an illegal question? Well, my response to that would be, you don't want a job at some place that asks you an illegal question, especially like how old are you, any kind of personal questions like that. At this day and age, people should know better than to ask you questions like that in an interview. If it does come up, you can say, I would respectfully decline to answer that. And honestly, I would not proceed with the interview at that point because that is probably not a company that you want to work for that has the best value or integrity. Yes.
So they can also get to the same point by asking like when you graduated from college. So
Right.
you can also define that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You can define that too. And that's something that in our program we teach people not to ask either. So even like where are you from can be seen as discriminatory because if I'm from Mexico and you think, okay, well, automatically she is an immigrant and she may have to be on a visa to work here, whatever the case may be, there's just so many questions around things that you cannot ask. So yeah, absolutely decline if someone asks you something that you don't feel comfortable answering. Yes.
So what is an illegal question?
There are a lot of them. So the question was, what is an illegal question? Where are you from is a big one. That's hard for me because that's just such a relatable question of where are you from? Oh, you're from Austin? So am I. I've lived here my whole life. I'm a native Texan. But that is a legal question. Are you expecting, or when are you due, or how long do you think you're going to take off work when you have the baby? All legal questions. Which, that last one, all illegal. Did you say legal or illegal?
Illegal. I'm trying to figure out what questions are illegal.
Right, so all the ones I just mentioned, that's a big one for the last one of if someone comes in and they're 6 months pregnant, the team says, okay, well, they're gonna be gone in 3 months for 3 months and I need someone on this project now. Can I ask them that question? The answer is no. They cannot ask you any questions around pregnancy. If you were discharged from the military, how you were discharged, why you left the military, let's see, basically anything around HR, age, race, religion, sex, anything like that. Okay. Yes.
To kind of answer him, like for the pregnancy one, if they're allowed to ask, like, are there any upcoming things that would limit how you can dedicate yourself to the job? They can't specifically ask, like, your family or like your religion, things like that.
Right.
But it has to be like all related to the job.
Correct. So basically, if you take the job description, they can ask you anything in that job description. So if it says it requires you to be able to speak Spanish, I can ask you, are you fluent in Spanish? But I can't say, are you Hispanic? That would be an illegal question. So anything that falls in those realms, if someone has a disability and it's clear to you that they cannot perform the job duties as an interviewer, but I ask them, can you perform these job duties? And they say yes, I have to take their word for it. I can't just rely on my eyes or knowing that they have a disability. They have to actually state that they do on their application or in the interview process. So just so you all know, so in case you ever go into an interview and people ask you these questions, now you know they're illegal and they cannot ask you those. Okay. Yes?
Thanks. I just filled out an application online. It's for a future training job. They ask all of those people. They want your social security number, they want to know how old you are, and of course race. And you could decline the race question. But that makes me really nervous.
They ask you for your social security number at the beginning of the interview process?
Before the interview, I had it on a job application.
Uh-huh. So some companies may ask that at the beginning for HR purposes and staffing. We used to at the beginning as well for whatever reason, and they stopped doing that. But some companies can ask you, and that's for HR and also for HR as a company. So if they're trying to, like for us, we're working on being a more diversity inclusive company. And so what we do is we monitor stuff like EEOC of, okay, can you please state your race, ethnicity, anything like that at the beginning of the process, but you can also decline. So that way, when we're going through our metrics at the end of the year, we can say, okay, we are a company that has 51% diversity. So that's the reason they ask those questions, but again, you can usually decline on that. For your social security number, I'm assuming it's for HR, but I have no idea why they ask you at the beginning of the process. So not sure on that. Yes?
Sorry, when you said HR purposes, that sounds like a Dodge to me. What exactly are HR purposes for asking for social security? What possible reason they haven't made a decision like you?
Right.
They need your social security. Don't see HR purposes. What purposes? Why do they need it? What are they going to do with it?
I've seen it for background checks.
Yeah.
Background checks before.
Right, so when I worked in staffing, it was for background checks and then also just for standard paperwork. As far as why they did it at the beginning of the process, that I don't know.
The first 100 people that apply, background check for the last 5 finalists.
Sometimes. Some companies do background checks beforehand. So like in staffing, for example, we did all of our background checks beforehand because our clients had very specific guidelines even for contractors. So for contractors, they couldn't have a misdemeanor within 5 years. So we would background check them at the beginning of the process. But it's different for every company. So I think right now that's actually in process of being illegal to ask up front. Yes.
I had somebody who was, it was fraud. I just typed in the phone number, and there were several reports that said this is fraud. They did not provide their social security number. So I had to do something to protect myself. So some common sense.
Yeah, and I would just call them too. If it's a job you really want and you don't feel comfortable putting in your social security number, which I don't think I would either, I would just call them and ask why they need it, because there should be a good reason. They shouldn't just be asking you for your information at random. Also, if you are doing a background check, there should be a form that you have to fill out as well that states that your consent, and that's where you sign, and then they ask for your social security number. So be mindful of that as well.
The number for background check. You use birthday and the name.
On some of the background checks, you need social. It depends on how in-depth it is too. So, yeah. Did someone? Yes.
I've never been asked for my social security number, but I've been applying for city jobs where they require citizenship, so they might lead by asking if you are authorized to work in the United States. And some of the jobs I've been applying for require criminal background checks, like volunteering for working for ATD or aviation.
Right.
And so they're asking for that information, so that just for citizenship purposes. Still, I've never been asked for my social security number.
Right. Good point. Yes.
What is your current or last pay rate? Is this legal or?
That is legal.
What do they want to use that for?
Basically, to see if it matches what they're putting in for the job role. So if the job role is for like $50,000 and you put in that you're looking for, or your last pay rate was $70,000, they're going to look at that and say, okay, there's a discrepancy. He may not be interested in this job because it's $20K below what he's actually looking for or currently making. So then at that point, they may call you and have a conversation. But
the guy is applying for a position that he knows is paying $50K, and he's okay with that.
But a lot of the job descriptions don't have the actual amount on them, which is probably why they ask the most, for the most part. So a lot of, as in general, I think a lot of job descriptions don't actually have the pay listed. And sometimes it can be confusing because it looks like it's a lower level or a higher level, and it may not be what they're looking for. So that's why they ask on the application. Well, hopefully not, right? Yeah. Yes.
What is the thinking from HR in not listing a salary range?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that one more time?
What is the thinking from HR in not wanting to list a salary range?
I think that's, and the question was, what is the thought process behind HR not listing the salary range? I think there's room for negotiation on both parts. So not necessarily lowballing, hopefully that's not how every recruiter thinks, right? But negotiation on the end of what the pay range actually is versus what the candidate is looking for too. And also sometimes they may not match. So if someone gets brought on at a lot lower level and ends up filling that job, they may not have the pay description match what's actually on that job description initially. So I think it's to make sure they're not scaring people off by looking at that pay range and saying, okay, that's not even within my comp or it's way below. Again, so a lot of it's negotiation. And someone else had a question over here. Yes.
What I have found annoying is when an employer does not disclose what the job pays, then they say, well, what are your salary requirements? That's extremely irritating. They are the one offering the job. They should tell me what the job pays, not me tell them what they should pay. Is that a legal question when they have not disclosed the salary?
No, that's not a legal question. And again, I've been on both sides, right? So I've been the candidate where I'm frustrated and don't want to divulge my salary information, but 99% of the time I'm on the other side too, right? Where it's a constant negotiation of, well, what do you want versus what are we actually paying? So I think it's, again, just trying to play the field of what information you're providing versus what information they're giving to. But no, unfortunately, it is not a legal question. Yes, someone over here. Yes.
The ZipRecruiter, I mean, half of the stuff that you see on there has no salary listed.
Right.
And, you know, when I began using these sites and stuff, I was kind of taken aback by that. I didn't.
Yeah, I don't think any of the sites that we use, like Indeed, Monster, ZipRecruiter, or even Gerbilder, have the requirements on there for candidates to see. Yeah. Yes.
Hey, I just want to say thank you for bringing your presentation here, and I feel like I'm in a therapy session now. There's a lot of frustration, and I get it. I enjoy that frustration, and I live through it, and I don't enjoy it, but I know you're here to do a presentation, and I would just ask, can we continue the presentation?
No worries. Thank you for that. And if y'all have any questions, feel free to pick my brain. I recruit all of the time, and I get these questions, and I completely understand where you're coming from. So if you want to ask me afterwards, that's also fine too. So any other questions before we move on? Good? Okay. Okay, so again, examples of traditional interview questions. So moving on. So now that we have talked a little bit about behavioral interview styles, does anyone know what exactly that means? So what a behavioral interview style method really is versus a traditional.
For those of us who Google in advance of you being there, it's basically applying what did you do in a specific situation.
Right, right. Right, exactly. So has anyone been asked a behavioral interview question? Okay, so not as many, but definitely some people. So this is Laszlo Bach. He was the senior VP of People Operations at Google. So they are really one of the companies that has focused on behavioral interviewing styles. So what they do now has really kind of monitored what progress someone's going to have in their role based on the experiences they listed in their interview. So we're a big fan of behavioral interview styles. It's definitely my favorite, especially because I feel like it makes me have the ability to get to know the candidate a lot better versus asking traditional questions where I feel like I'm just getting fluff. So going over specifically what that is. So this is questions based on past experience. So the questions that are asked are supposed to predict your future behavior in your new role. So again, question example would be, instead of saying, what is your greatest weakness? A spin on that I could ask instead is, tell me about a time you made a significant mistake in your role. How did you overcome that? And how did you fix it the next time? So do you see the difference between the two? There's a drastic change between saying, what's your greatest weakness? Where you're going to give me some BS answer that you've rehearsed and practiced a ton of times. And then instead saying, what is a significant mistake you've made? How many people like to talk about their flaws in interviews? Not a lot, right? So you want to really draw these experiences out of people, find out how much humility they have, how humble they are, and if they're going to answer you honestly. Also, you're going to rely more on fact versus gut feeling as an interviewer. So this is so important, especially for you all, right? You want to make sure that when you're going into an interview, people are really looking at your specific experience versus if they like you or not. One of my least favorite things to hear is, well, I really liked her. She was a really great fit, but I didn't really learn that much about her, but we should offer her a job. Hey, well, what did you learn about her? What did you learn about what she's going to do with the role? Did you like her because she mentioned that she also has all the same interests as you? What did you actually figure out about how her experience is going to fit into the position? So this is really, again, working on finding out those facts. Because, again, if you tell me your greatest weakness is that you work too much and you never actually take PTO, okay, what am I learning about you, right? Versus if you give me a very specific example about a mistake you've made, now I have something very concrete and fundamental to go off of. And then responses that require specific examples. So this is only going to help you out too because it gives you the opportunity to talk more about your past experience and what you've done before as well. Okay? Okay, so benefits of interviewing as an employer, just so you're aware of why we do this, and we've already talked about it a little bit. So again, uncovering actions candidates took to deliver strong or positive results in the past. So looking at your past behavior, again, hopefully as a predictor for the future. And then again, predicting job performance accurately. Requires people to think quickly on their feet. So I know this isn't a great selling point for candidates or for you all, right? Because you have to make sure that you are somewhat prepared, but for some behavioral interviews, there's just not a great way to prepare. Just make sure you have examples on hand. But it does say, okay, how quickly can they think on their feet? How can they respond to these questions best when they don't have a lot of notice and haven't prepped for it? And then showing whether or not they're a good values fit. So this is really important to a lot of companies. This is definitely important to us. One of the things we look for is this person going to be a good company, culture, and values fit? So we have 6 values that we adhere to. One of those I just mentioned was humility. That's actually something we look for specifically in an interview. So if you have all of the experience and then you don't show humility or a winning attitude, you're probably not going to get the job at Accruent because those are so important to us. So that's what a lot of companies look for as well. Now, again, if you're asking those more traditional questions, you're not going to get as great of a response if you did ask the behavioral instead. So before we move on, any questions on that? Yes.
I don't have a question about this kind of style. I have been part of this though, and I guess my question is, so Amazon is big on this, and I flew out to Seattle to talk to Amazon. P.S. I don't want to live in Seattle. It's great a lot of the time. It's very depressing. But I did this, and it was with 6 or 7 people at 45 minutes each, and you just don't you as a person just only have maybe like 10 seminal experiences in your life, right? And so when you look at this, like some of these obviously you could reuse, right? Which ideally you would, right? But what happens when you really are, and I'm assuming that at your company and others, you're going to be interviewed by a group of people and likely not at the same time, right? So you don't want them to all get back in the room and say, oh, well, Jennifer gave, we all got the same story about blah, blah, blah. But, realistically, how many would you expect a human being to know?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Jennifer's question was, if you have multiple people that are interviewing you and you only have a certain amount of examples, does it look poorly if you use the same type of stories or examples with different interviewers? So I used to think as a candidate that it was. As an interviewer, I can say that it's definitely not. I would say that as long as your stories are streamlined and they're the same across the board, then it's fine. I would try and, recycle a few stories, but if you're using a couple of the same ones with different interviewers, that's perfectly fine. Anyone else? Someone back here had a question? Nope? Okay. So moving on to why this benefits you specifically. So again, you're actually able to give examples of your previous job history. So most people like talking about themselves, especially talking positively. If you are giving a traditional answer, it's really not talking about you. It's more of, yeah, I could do that, but that's not what I have actually done. So really getting to highlight yourself. I like to call it humble brag. It's not supposed to be you just boasting about your awesome career and how great you are, right? But talking about your accomplishments. Most people are uncomfortable with this, but there is no reason that you should be, because you want to make sure you're really selling yourself. You're trying to get that job and portray yourself in the best light. So again, making sure to really give examples about things that you have done that you're proud of in your career, because a resume can only get you so far and it can only sell you so much. The interview is really where you're going to make sure to give as much information as possible. Okay. And then proof that you're a strong candidate for the role. Again, those traditional questions are not going to prove anything. If you're going over your past experience, this is going to be a lot more proof versus, yeah, that's what I could do versus this is what I did. Providing more in-depth questions or responses to one question. One of the things we like to tell our interview teams is to use, let's see, if you're on that sheet, just use maybe like 3 of those behavioral questions and then go into at least 2 to 3 follow-ups for each question. So tell me about your biggest accomplishment. That's one question. Then a follow-up would be, how did you accomplish that? What were your milestones to hit that? Things like that. So you have more follow-ups. So that gives you the opportunity to talk a lot more in depth about that one particular event. And then, so preventing bias from first impressions. So same thing as the interviewers. We want to make sure that you're getting a fair chance to actually interview with the teams. So you're preventing any sort of bias because they're going off of facts, again, versus just gut feeling. Any questions before I move on from this section? Nope. Okay. Alrighty, so here's some examples. So obviously you have the sheet that has 20 examples as well. You can scour the web, they have a ton. You should. Does anyone have extra sheets for back here?
No, unfortunately, but if you'll email it to me, I'll put it for and get it in the file.
Sounds good, thank you. So that has 20 interview questions on there, but again, you can scour the web and look through any kind of behavioral questions. Really, they're everywhere, but these are just some examples I'm going to show you. We'll go over. So tell me about the first job you had. What did you learn from it? Describe a time you had a difference of opinion with your supervisor. How did you reach a compromise? My boss asked me this question during my interview, and it terrified me because I had never been in a behavioral interview. And this is a scary question when your boss, your future boss, is asking you how you disagreed with your supervisor, and you have to be honest about it, but PC, not the funnest question, but good to know and remember. Give me an example of a time you failed on a project. How did you overcome it? Also a very difficult question, but I recommend using as much humility as possible. And then tell me about a specific instance where your job got too overwhelming and how did you prioritize to make sure you had everything to do. So just again, based off of the 2 that we saw for traditional and behavioral, do you see the real difference between the 2? Right. So who thinks traditional is more beneficial for interviews? That's the first one we went over. Behavioral? Yeah, everyone? Okay. So again, behavioral is going to be a lot more difficult to prep for, so I would recommend looking over those questions to see if you need to prep for any of those just in case the interviewer asks you those, and you'll be more prepared.
I think one tool that's always helped me is I associate with narratives or stories. So typically there's another person
Yeah.
involved. So each one of these questions has a name assigned to it. So when I'm in the interview, I'm like, oh, that's Brandon. And then I'll tell the story of the interaction with Brandon and how I overcame that. And then it follows. But it's a good way to compartmentalize and then I get an image of that person. It becomes more of a storytelling,
Right.
a conversation, which I think engages the recruiter
Yeah.
and makes them interested in what they want. They want to hear more of the story.
Right.
Rather than just the romance.
Right. That's actually a really great question. What's your name?
Eric.
Eric. So that's a really good point about storytelling. So interviews should feel very comfortable, even if your interviewer is not the most comfortable person or they're a little intense or whatever the case may be. You want to make sure you're feeling as comfortable as possible. So to put yourself at ease, behavioral interviewing helps so much. So again, just think of it as telling your friend a story, something you did in the past, which quite frankly I think is much easier than having to make something up when someone says, what would you do in this situation? When it's actually something you have done previously, right? Yes.
What is the adoption rate of these interviews in the current market? Do you know?
I don't know the exact rate. Actually, I just saw something this morning from 2008. I think it was like over 51% of companies had moved over to behavioral interviewing, but that was from 2008. So I'm sure it's gone up significantly. I can tell you majority of software companies do behavioral-based interviewing. Anyone else? Yes.
Well, the bad part of behavioral interviewing is if you've had 20 jobs in your life and they ask that question about, tell me about a time of a conflict with your boss, your mind jumps to that boss from hell where the company went bankrupt and it was a total disaster.
Right.
And that's not relevant. Right, that's not the relevant example, right? Like you almost need to delete that one from your memory, and one where there was a successful conclusion where it wasn't a predetermined failure.
Right, absolutely. And I think that's the hard part of being able to think quickly on your feet is you normally go to those really negative examples of, okay, well, I hated working with that boss. That's what I want to talk about, but I have to be somewhat politically correct and not divulge too much information. But it's funny because one of my recruiters, I asked her that exact question when we were hiring her, and she was very PC about her answer. She just said that there was an issue with the current company. Basically, again, just gave me like the surface level, went into a couple follow-up questions, but she never said anything bad about them. And now that she's worked with me for 4 months, she told me how much she can stand her boss. But I never knew that in the interview, right? So if you're gonna go to that negative place, again, pulling it in and making sure you're PC versus just saying, oh my gosh, that was the worst company ever. And that's another thing, thank you for bringing that up as well, that I see a lot of people do on the phone screen is they will completely bash their current company or their previous company. And it's something that if you've been burned by them and you're upset and you didn't like your boss, it's so easy to go to that place. But I'm telling you, as a recruiter, that is something I will automatically disqualify someone for. So if they're going to talk bad about their current company or their last company to me and I don't even know them, what are they going to say about me when they get hired? Or what are they going to say about their current boss or their current role? So just be mindful. As much as you might want to talk badly about them, don't do it. Okay.
I was just going to say, I'm easy to say, questions I ask.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point too. Brian, just mentioned that he uses the same questions to ask them about their company too. So always, again, this is really going off topic, I'm sorry, but if you're going to get on a phone screen with someone or you're going into an interview, definitely have questions prepared to ask for them as well. That's something I really love to see as an interviewer is when people have a lot of questions for me and they've clearly done their research on either me or the team or the company. I want to see that because I like getting difficult questions. They're few and far between and it makes me feel like someone really wants to be there and is engaged. Yes?
Since you're going on topic, I'd like to put one question.
Okay.
Tell me if you'd rather I actually find it.
Okay.
I like to know two things like, number one, what is the official approved position on the cover letters? They're good, they're not good, they're needed, not needed, how do you use them, if you do, or if they're related to cover. And the second one is, does approved do those annoying tests where you have to see circle, square, rectangle, what's the next
item in the sequence?
Shape.
Yeah, the shape. And what do you get from that?
Yeah, so I will ask the latter question first because it's the hardest one and I get it all the time. And yes, we are the king of the assessment. We were owned by Vista Equity Partners. They have their portfolio companies, I think they have 26 now, all do the assessment. So we are one of them. Our founder, when we left Vista, decided he wanted to keep that in place. So that is actually something that we use as part of the interview process. So basically what it is there's two portions. There's an employment personality profile. So that is supposed to monitor if you're going to be a good fit within that particular role that you're applying for. So engineer's profile is going to look drastically different from someone on the people teams versus sales versus customer service versus product management, but we do utilize that in that first portion. Another part that we do is also the, just lost it, it's a cognitive portion test. So it's going to have the math, logic, and vocab. So when I started, I just did not understand why we would ever do an assessment or what we got out of that. Personally, because I'm terrible at math, I had no idea how I even passed. But one of the things that we use, and really it's not, okay, are you good at math? Are you good at percentages? Because you're really not going to use that, right? It's testing to see how quickly, again, you can think on your feet and how you're presented with challenges and how you do on them. So it's really more based around that information versus, okay, are you good at math? Are you good at sequences? Things like that. It's timed as well, so that's kind of the thought process again around how quickly can you think on your feet. And then your first question was cover letters. This varies between company and recruiter, honestly. We have it as part of our process. I like them, but I don't have a strong opinion on them either way. What I do really like is if someone includes the company name and my name and the position. So if you're going to use cover letters, definitely make sure you include specific information. I know it's kind of a pain to have to change it every single time, but it's definitely worth it. And I always put a candidate in higher regard if they have that information changed as well. So it's not just like a blanket cover letter of, I'm looking for, whatever position in an organization. Okay, well that could be anybody, right? So that's telling me that you just blasted your resume to 20 different jobs, and I'm one of them. Also, going off topic a little bit, what I do really disdain is when I'm on the phone with someone and they're like, okay, well, I need to look up the job description. I can't remember which job this is for. Okay, well, we had a scheduled phone screen. You could have done that prior to this call, right? And you will be surprised how many people actually do that. So make sure you're prepared. If you can't remember which job it is, just Google it or go on the website. Just make sure you look it up and you're prepared ahead of time. And even if you're not, never say that. Okay. Someone raise their hand. Yes.
So to piggyback on that, I've read a number of times that recruiters or hiring managers hardly have time to look on resumes, much less the cover letters. And so often what's put in cover letter is going to be fluff, So I've taken to where, unless it's specifically requested, I don't send it. But in the back of my mind, I'm always wondering if they pitch it because there's not one. Right. So, yeah, maybe a little more feedback on that. I know you say it varies, but I don't want to shortchange myself.
Yeah, that's completely understandable. I would say when in doubt, just send it out to every job you're applying for. If you have any hesitation, and I don't want to say don't send it out, right? And then some companies are wondering why you didn't send a cover letter. So I would say just go ahead and send it out to every company. But you're right, majority of it could be fluff. What I do read cover letters for is if there's any kind of a gap in job history or if there's anything that's missing on that resume that I may not understand, it could be found in the cover letter. So like a good example is if a stay-at-home mom had stayed at home with her kids for 5 years and she has a huge gap and I see that and wonder, okay, well, was she just unemployed? She puts that in her cover letter and explains that versus if I had just discarded it because she didn't write it anywhere. So I think that cover letters are good places to put some of that additional information that may not always be found in the resume too. So when in doubt, just go ahead and send it out. Yes?
So I've heard that some of the questions are trying to see how you work alone, how you work in a team. What are the types of categories they're trying to understand to get to know you?
Can you repeat the question?
What types of these behavioral questions are trying to get to know you? So one way they might be trying to get to know you is how you work as part of the team. Another way might be how you work on your own. What are the other things they're trying to get to know?
Aside from how you work in a team versus yourself. So that's actually a really good point as well. So this is one of the things we train our interviewers on. It's called I versus we. So we look out for how many times someone has said, we did this on a project, we did that, we implemented this, instead of saying I. Because what we're looking for is what did you do? So it's great that you worked on a team, but now I'm going to ask you follow-up questions on, okay, so your team implemented this project, but how were you a part of that? Because what we've seen a lot is someone will say, oh, we created this whole interviewer certification program, but if you said, okay, well, Amanda, what did you do on that project? And I said, oh, well, actually, my boss did everything. So now you know that I didn't really do anything, right? So that's important information that you want to make sure you're looking out for and you're saying as a candidate. Same goes the other way. If you say I in your whole interview and you're going to be on a team, so like Accruent's very collaborative, we're very much about teamwork. So if someone says I the whole time and never differs from saying we or talking about their team communication or anything like that, that's something we'll look out for. So be mindful, neither one is wrong, just making sure you're using those at the appropriate places. So I'd say a lot of those behavioral questions that you just asked about are based around looking for the difference between those two. Yes?
Well, I don't think there's really a way to know going into an interview what model the interviewer is going to use, right?
Right.
Because you're going to have to prepare for both.
Correct.
So let's say I like the behavioral style better, I personally do. Is it reasonable for the interviewee to guide the interviewer to the behavioral model versus
Yeah, absolutely. And someone else asked about that, and we were talking about how we go over that as well. But that is a great style, and I think that, again, it goes back into storytelling, and it just feels so natural. They probably won't even notice what you're doing. So if they say, tell me about your greatest weakness, and you say, well, I don't know if I can give you my exact weakness, but let me tell you about a significant mistake I made, and then you can play off some of my weaknesses there. So, or you can even say, prioritization sometimes can be my weakness. This is a significant mistake I've made, but this is how I overcame it, and this is how I'm working on resolving that particular issue. So you can turn it back around on the behavioral model. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. Yes.
So I have a great view from the back here of the tints of everybody's hair color. And my question goes to when you're interviewing with somebody who's younger than you, which happens a lot, and their perceptions of weaknesses and strengths and values could be different. You know, what naturally, intuitively excites them. I know they're going after facts, but can you really get around completely some of the gut of how somebody looks or, you know, things that they value that maybe aren't, you know, oh, I love being at this company for 30 years, and they like have never had a job more than 2 years.
Right.
So do you have any comments on interviewing with someone significantly younger than you?
Yeah, I think that's hard too, right? Because you need to make, or companies need to make sure that their teams are well trained on that so they're not being discriminatory, because people have an inclination to hire others that look just like them or are just like them. And that's what we're trying to get away from by being discriminatory. I think what candidates can do in that regard is not mention it, for one. Just on the other end of that, so I started recruiting when I was 22, so I was a very young recruiter in my first position. One of the things I hated the most was when people would say, oh, you're so much younger than me, you probably weren't even born when this happened. Okay, well, maybe not, but I'm still qualified for this job, right? So you've just kind of insulted me about my age, and I don't want to do that to you, so I would say just avoid it at all costs. You don't want to work for someone that's going to be discriminatory anyway. I would say look for a company that really focuses on those values, not necessarily what their own are. If you see an issue, maybe talk to HR about it, but that's just difficult as a candidate to be able to get around that. But I would say on your end too, make sure you're not putting out any kind of discriminatory vibe towards the interviewer, if that makes sense. Yes?
We see you talking about weakness as a mistake that you made in the past that you subsequently correct.
Right.
If someone were to ask me what my weakness is, I would say that I'm not as high tech as I should be, that I would require training to be more up to date in terms of computer skills.
Right.
That has nothing to do with a mistake that I made subsequently correct.
Yeah, that's a great point too, and I don't think it necessarily has to be some sort of mistake you've made, right? But if you do get an interview question that says, what is your greatest weakness? And you say, I'm not as high tech, these are the trainings that I will need to be proficient in this role, I would also complement that with saying, but this is what I'm doing in order to correct that and fix that on my own too, or maybe to build up on that strength. But I think that's actually a great answer if someone does ask you that, because you're being very honest and open and not saying something, again, that's fluff, right? So I think that's a perfect answer. You have a question?
Yes. When people ask behavioral questions about your past experiences, should you feel okay about talking about volunteer work you've done in the role type, or should you primarily stick to the paid position that you had in that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question was if you should stick with just your paid professional experience or volunteer opportunities or that you've done in the past. definitely go with volunteer as well, whatever you feel most comfortable with, definitely. Good on time? Am I?
Oh, yeah, I was just like,
Oh.
hey, volunteer.
Yeah. And someone else have a question? Nope. Okay, so I'm gonna move on. I think this is actually it. We're gonna skip over this. But that is it. Do you have any more questions for me? Unrelated to behavioral interviewing, if you have anything else that you want to pick my brain about, I'll limit to like 5 questions so we don't go over time too much. Yes.
Is it ethical for them to ask you what part of town you live in? Because we've had people call me after I applied and they kind of excluded me because they thought I lived too far away.
Yeah, that's a good question. So it's not illegal for them to ask what part of town you live in, especially, I guess, in Austin, but also we're taught to never make that decision for someone, right? So if you live in Buda and the position is in Round Rock and I call you, I cannot say, okay, well, I'm gonna exclude her because she lives in Buda and I think it's too far. Same with comp. I can't just decide for someone now, if you're 20K over, I'm just gonna, throw away your application. I still have to email you and say, hey, FYI, this is 20K under what you're looking for, but are you still interested? So as an interviewer, they should not exclude you from the interview process. But they can ask you. Yes.
I've also had a challenge with agencies in that I'm looking for a permanent position. I'm looking for the best fit, long-term type of thing. But as time goes along, I've had to also start looking for more temporary positions because the others not landed on my doorstep yet. But what just stuns me is that I get very little feedback or offers or contact from staffing agencies. And I don't know if I feel like I'm being categorized, like she's looking for this type of position with this type of firm. It's like, yeah, ultimately, but in the meantime, I need to work. So I'm really capable of doing this, and this type of thing. And so I just don't get any communication back, and I feel like that's telling me I'm not hireable even in a temporary position, but I know that I can. How do I address that?
Oh, I would say definitely talk to your staffing agency first and make sure they're aware of the fact that you want something permanent versus just a contractor role. I will say from my own experience, if someone is a contractor and we put them out on an assignment for 3 months, we won't take them from that assignment to put them on a permanent position because we've already put them with our client, right? So that's a staffing agency issue because they don't want to burn that bridge with their client. My advice as a candidate would be to go to as many staffing agencies as you can to look into different contract or permanent positions. We just had a contractor at a Cruin who was hired by a vendor who knew that he was looking to leave. And so he was interviewing with other companies outside his staffing agency so he could find something permanent. He just got a permanent position too. So I would say look at as many possible. Definitely talk to your staffing agency, make sure they're aware of it. And if they're only going to put you on contract roles, let them know you're more interested in a permanent position too.
Well, and actually I'm looking for the alternative. Right now, I need work.
Right.
And so I'm not getting any kind of response. And I don't know if it's because I haven't had a position that's been administrative assistant, it's been in salaries. And I can handle anything like that, but I'm not getting any communication on this one. So that's kind of where
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would follow up with the staffing agencies too, and like I said, I would just try and go to as many different ones as possible. Yes.
Is it improper for an employer to discriminate against you based on the mode of transportation? For example, I've had an employer ask, do you have a car? My answer is no, I travel on Capital Metro. Then they scoff at that and imply that if you travel by public transportation, you are not going to show up for work on time because public transportation is somehow unreliable.
Right. So yes, they are able to ask that question, and the reason for that is, let's say if you are on Capital Metro, but they don't have a stop by that particular area, or if it's a mile away from where the route is, then you may not be able to physically be able to get there in time. So that would be why they could ask you that question. Yes.
Can you convince other reviewers to come this way and at least
Sure. Is this helpful?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I went to SMU in the 80s, where Delta and Salon, Iota, put in a fraternity. So there are people with beautiful discrepancies, like supervise, things like that. And I was just very excited that they're working and doing lots of box here. What improvement you guys do, somebody that has something in your past that shows us that maybe
Yeah, that's a good question. So it's more on a case-by-case basis, and we don't do the background check until the very end of the process. So it's usually after they've gotten hired, then we'll go through background checks. I think that's actually most common with all companies now, but again, it's more of a case-by-case basis. It depends on what they are. If it's someone who got a DWI like 2 years ago and they're in sales and they'll be on the road constantly, that would be a more significant issue than someone who is going to be a customer success manager, never traveling, sitting in the office all day. So I think that's really, it's more of a case-by-case situation, and if it's something that you are concerned with, I would definitely ask the company ahead of time so you can just kind of nip it in the bud before going through the interview process. Yes?
How much, once you've interviewed a candidate and trying to make a decision, do you rely on external sources beyond the interview? And when I say that, I mean specifically like social media. Do you go and do your own unofficial background check, or is it a common practice in the HR industry? And I don't mean to put you on the spot, I'm just saying, is it a tool that HR uses nowadays?
Yeah, great question. So the question's around how much do we use social media for external sourcing, or external, I guess, background checks. We don't. I'm sure people do on their own. Unfortunately, you can't really get around it when your information is out there. But I highly discourage people to do that in our training program, just because you're going to come in with that natural bias in an interview. So if you look at someone's profile on Facebook and you see that they're married with 2 kids, and I'm also married with 2 kids, I'm going to come into the interview already knowing we're going to have something in common or get along. So for that reason, I tell people don't even look it up. Just look at their LinkedIn. Don't go searching for Instagram or Facebook or anything like that, because we don't want you to be biased in any way. So when I was in staffing, we used it a lot more, which we probably shouldn't have. That was before social media was like the #1 place to go look up someone's information, and everything was on the web. But I would encourage you to make sure, in case your interviewer does not follow that protocol, don't post anything that should not be on social media. Yes? We call 3. We have a background check company that does it, but yeah, they call and look up all that information. Yeah.
What questions do you have for references?
It depends too on the background check company one, and then also what the actual company is looking for. So there's times where we do references aside from the ones that are on the background check, and you have to fill out a form that you state exactly what questions they ask. So sometimes they'll ask more questions related to your job performance, any kind of questions related to that job description if they think you'd be a good fit. Ours is a lot more vague. It's just what years were you there? Are the dates accurate that you put in your application? Is the salary accurate? Are you eligible for rehire? And then I think it has like 1 question around performance, but it's very streamlined, and it's like a 1 to 10 response. So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
But if the references are 11 years old, is there
If your references are 11 years old, I would say it depends on your reference. Like if you keep in contact with them, I would keep them on there. If it's someone that you don't ever talk to, take them off and find someone new. Someone else have a question over here? Nope. Yes.
What about style of dress? You know, professional is different for different companies, and you know, if you come in overdressed and you think underdressed or overdressed isn't great, how do you get a feel for that? And you certainly know if it's a law firm versus, I don't know, what construction firm, it might have a different look, but how do you get a sense of that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it's around professional dress. I always recommend for candidates to come in business professional attire. There is no reason why it would hurt you in the interview process at all. At Accruent, we are business casual, and we are even lax on that. I mean, there are people that come in shorts and t-shirts and hats on Fridays and Mondays sometimes too. So again, we're pretty lax, but I always dress up for interviews, and I always tell candidates, wear business casual. If you wear business professional, not an issue. Always dress up, right?
Business casual would be different also in Dallas.
Oh, absolutely. That's 100% correct. If business casual is business professional in Dallas, yes. But yeah, I would say just across the board, just to be safe, go business professional. Yes.
Probably one of them, you'll wear a strong perfume or cologne.
Oh, good point. Yes. Definitely don't wear strong perfume or cologne. That can be very overwhelming. Also bring your resume. Most of the time they'll have it with them in the interview, but just bring it in case they need a copy. I had an interview before I got my job at Accruent where I walked in and the lady was like, okay, who are you? Who am I meeting with? Do you have your resume? I haven't even looked at it yet. And I was like, oh, this is going to end really well. So, yeah, did not take that job. Any other questions? Yes.
Talk about resumes, 2-page versus 3 or 4-page.
2, 100%. And 1 if you can, which I know is almost impossible, but 1 to 2, definitely no more than that. Yes.
I don't need the whole process. I want to job with Amazon or Whole Foods, or right Amazon or Whole Foods, or go to an agency.
It depends on what they use. So some people use just agencies to hire, other people hire directly. I would just look at what's on their website, because a lot of the times, even if like you go to LinkedIn to apply for a job on Amazon, you have to go through the agency or they'll be the ones that review it. So I would say it just depends on the company. Right. So with vendors or with staffing agencies, it's difficult because sometimes you don't know what job you're applying for because they can't tell you the information until you get the interview. So that's the tough part about working with agencies. You just have to trust they're submitting you for a good one. Sometimes they will tell you what the job is. It just depends on what their confidentiality is with that company. But sometimes you can do the research too and figure it out. But also, point on that, there is a difference between recruiters and headhunters. Recruiters at agencies and recruiters in general, they work for companies. Headhunters work for individuals and are paid by candidates. So if you're going through an agency and you're expecting them to contact you constantly with job updates, that's not going to happen because they work for a company. So as much as they would love to help you find something, they're working for that company to find the best fit for their organization, not necessarily helping you find the best fit. I know that sounds kind of harsh, but again, just keep that in mind. If you're not getting contacted, it's on you to follow up with them.